This episode, simple air conditioning fixes. Well, folks, we are in the middle of AC season. It is here in Atlanta, Georgia. It has been hotter than a $2 pistol, as they like to say. So we thought that before you go and call the technician, that you will give you a couple of ideas to check your AC and also give you a little bit of an explanation as to how air conditioning works. We're trying to save you time, money, and aggravation on that not paying a technician. Welcome to the Handyman Pros Radio Show, home improvement and maintenance tips from the pros. Thanks for listening to another edition of the Handyman Pros Radio Show, where our goal is to help save you time, money, and aggravation on your home maintenance and repair. This edition is entitled Simple Air Conditioning Fixes. And to help me explain, I've got my ever faithful co-host and old buddy, Johnny, Mr. Air Conditioning, Mr. HVAC himself. Johnny, what has been going on with you this week? You've been drinking Mountain Dew already. What did you have, a big night last night?
No. I got my Mountain Dew, but I got my gin.
Oh, nice. Gin and Mountain Dew. That's something
new. Hey, Stack Calhoun.
Hey, Stack Calhoun.
Yeah.
What was that banjo music I hear in the background?
Oh, yeah. Keep going. Yeah. Paddle faster.
Paddle faster. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So what's going on? Just let's see, what have I been doing? I got an AC story though for you.
Oh, do you?
Mm-hmm. And I'll tell that to you in a minute as we get into this.
Tell me about you. Didn't you go over to a friend of yours' house that's having his house built?
I did.
Tell me some stories out of that. So this is a new home construction.
Yeah, new home construction. I mean, it's like I said, it's more or less kind of a custom cookie cutter type of neighborhood. Very nice. Very nice. I wouldn't say that these are, it's not like a custom home,
right.
That kind of thing.
It's not an individual
track,
Yep.
But it's very nice. And, hopefully after the second 100th home, that they would have this down with a couple of variations, and they do. And it was really nice. It was really nice to see. Very solid. Everything was tight, fit together. I was just looking at some of the details, and there's a couple of opportunities that you could do some things now that would make it a lot easier to do now than later.
Yep.
Because the house is almost done. They're painting the inside of it.
Yep.
So he's gonna have a very nice house. So everything's neatly wired and everything. I mean, it's nice. So
cool.
All right. Good to see. Good to see.
Good to see. Well, yeah, as you said, after
for what
versions.
I know, I haven't seen. I didn't look through everything, but So, anyways.
After 300 homes, one would hope. All right. Well, before we get started, folks, we'd like to ask you to like and subscribe to our show. Send us a review and a rating too. It helps other people looking for this information to be able to find it. It's how the algorithms work, all that good groovy stuff. All right, Johnny, tell me your HVAC story. I'm really.
So one of the things that we're going to be talking about here is just the condensate pumps, right?
Yes.
Okay. And the drain line. So if you want me to tell that now,
let's talk about it when we get to. That's one of the points, right?
Right.
That's one of the points.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. So Johnny, I think the first thing we need to do is there's just some ground rules, not ground rules. That's not really the right thing. It's ground information on AC or refrigeration. It's all really the same thing, and how it actually works. So I thought that we would talk about how an AC unit actually works in kind of broad sweeps. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So one thing that they always talk about in the HVAC world is differential. Johnny, you want to describe what that is, what differential is?
Well, you're talking about the delta T between the.
We're not doing physics, Johnny. We're not
between. Well, it's a delta temperature.
Right. It's the difference between
between
how
the
hot
out
it is outside
right,
and how hot it is, or
right,
how cool you're trying to make it inside. Well,
right.
it works for both
It,
hot and cold.
there's a
So,
lot of things here, folks. And let me just kind of reset a couple of things. I think, without Larry and I going into a lot of detail on this and spending a lot of time on it, there's some good there's some good articles, there's books, there's YouTube, there's other things that can explain, how your air conditioner works. And I think when we had another episode on this, and I might have mentioned this, is that you should go out and understand how your air conditioner works.
in broad sweeps,
In
yes.
broad sweeps, because
Yeah.
it's not that hard to
No.
understand that. However, it does bring to light some things that, make sense to you after you learn that, what you should keep your eye on in terms of maintenance, and why to keep your eye on it. I think,
Correct.
if I could put it that way.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. The reason that we talk about ambient temperature, or delta T as it's called, which is the differential, it's the differential between outside and inside.
Well,
And
here's what I'm talking about, Larry. Is the delta T really refers to what's coming out of your air conditioner duct and what's going back in.
right.
So we'll get to that, but Larry's on to something here about, your ambient temperature that's outside versus how cool it is
Cool
on
you
the
can
inside.
expect it. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's more a question of expectations.
Yeah, exactly.
And let's just, I lived in Texas and I live here in Georgia now, and I lived outside of Dallas, and trust me, in the summertime in Dallas, it's hot. When it's 110
Yeah, it gets
degrees
warm.
outside. Yeah, when it's 110 degrees outside, you've got a long way to go essentially to make it 70 degrees. I'm just going to use 70 as a number, right? That's 40 degrees. That's a 40-degree differential you're trying to
Boy,
achieve. And that's a very, very, in the
that's
HVAC world, that's a very large differential. In automotive, it's the same thing. And in automotive, and I remember this from being in the trucking industry, they worked on the max differential you were going to get was about 20 degrees. So if your air conditioning was working flawlessly in a vehicle, you're going to get about a 20-degree differential. So when it's 110 out, it's going to be 90. And that's the best it's ever going to do. Now, they
yeah,
might have changed that since then,
yeah.
but the reality
Yeah,
is
here's
it
how
is
they've
what
changed it, because they're insulated a little different. I mean, your house
correct.
isn't made of metal like
No,
a car.
and it doesn't have as much glass
Yeah, yeah.
too.
So it's in that little space. So
Right.
it is, and I'll tell you what, if I remember right, I think some of the air conditioning units in cars are pretty large units. If
They're
they're about two
compared to
tons,
the
I think.
volume. Yeah, compared to the volume of the size of the vehicle, they are.
Yeah,
Yes, very much so.
they're pretty hefty. So to really drive down the heat. Anyways,
Anyway,
but you bring up a good point, and it is the expectation. And I think it's like, once you understand that, folks, it's now the question of how to capture the coolness and keep out the heat.
yes, and conversely, if you live in cold climates, and we'll probably do we'll probably do this same show come wintertime, because there's some things on the heating side that are different than the
Mm-hmm.
cooling side, but these basic ideas work if it's hot outside. So getting back to there's two other points I want to make. One is definitely on your home. If you have an older home, folks, and I've dealt a lot with homes built from pre 1970. I'm going to say anything from 1812 to 1970. Is your home actually insulated? Number one, because it's kind of funny. I was writing this show up. I'm just going to tell the story. I'm writing the show up. I got a text from a buddy of mine, and I know his house very well. And his house was built in the 1940s, and I can tell you his house has zero, and I mean zero, insulation in it. It has wood clapboard on the outside and drywall on the inside, and a 3.5-inch gap in between. And there's nothing, not even any newspapers. There's nothing in his walls, nothing. And he's like, my air conditioner isn't working very well. I'm like, and it never will.
And it never, yeah, and that's
Never
it, yeah,
will.
yeah.
Because your house needs to be properly insulated, which is why current code requires that your house is insulated to the various different levels for wherever you live in. Anyway, be that as it may, that is an underlying cause of one of the reasons why your air conditioning might not work. And it just depends on where you live and the age of your home. So these are things to be aware of. These are expectations. We're just trying to set these expectations. And then, John, I mentioned one that my wife does this in the car, and you said your wife does the same thing in the house. Folks, turning the thermostat down does not mean the house is going to get colder. It does not speed the process up. These
Yeah.
things work they work at a set rate. So for every hour, it's just like water flow. If you turn your hose on, it's going to throw out X number of gallons a
Yeah,
minute.
it's just as how long the thing's going to be on to try to drive the temperature down.
So
And I think
the
the
temperature doesn't
typical
do anything.
what you're going to hope for in a typical day is probably somewhere around 50 degrees coming out of your the vents. And that's if you get 55 degrees, you're doing pretty good.
You're actually doing really well.
Yeah.
So, and there's a whole, and these are the things we're not going to get into. We're not going to get into like how do you make that part of it more efficient, things like that, because that's
beyond this. But
yes.
but that's what's coming out of there. So if you think that's 50 or 60 degrees coming out of there, that's it, guys.
Yeah,
no matter what the thermostat's set at.
Yeah,
if it's running,
there is no more. This is, and just back on that, and I think about this now because of some things. We talked about automotive and about glass, and so one of the ways to cool your house down a little bit is draw your shades and or your mini blinds too, and keep the sunlight from coming out, because sunlight has a very unique factor, and you can look this up. When sunlight goes through glass, it actually changes the wavelength, and it traps the wavelength inside whatever structure it happens to be in, be it a house, a car, whatever. That wavelength changes, it causes it to heat, and the heat stays in. So if you draw your shades, that's one way to reduce your cooling in the summer, especially when it's really, and when we lived in Texas, Johnny, those shades were drawn all the time because it was nutso hot out there. I mean, crazy stuff. So anyway, that's a tip.
Yeah,
right there.
I mean that's a good tip. I mean that's radiant heat, right? So
Correct.
That's coming through the glass. And
Yep.
let's say that folks, the classic is you're sitting in a conference room, or you're sitting in one of your rooms, and you got those black chairs.
Ooh.
And the sun is beating on those. Well, then those chairs get hot from radiant heat, and then it's basically convection after that. That heat's just escaping from the chair inside the room. So
Best to sit on those in shorts, right, John?
Right. I mean, and it's heating up tables. It's heating up everything.
Heats up everything.
So
it heats up everything.
And this is another reason that bigger AC units aren't more efficient than smaller ones, because they go on and off too fast and they don't cool down those chairs.
Right.
And then you're still in the same boat, and they go on and off, and basically folks, when you start to research this stuff, the most power draw from an AC is when it starts up.
Starts and stops, yeah.
So anyways,
starts actually.
So anyways,
those are just that's just a tip that is a reality, and especially obviously if you have a side of the house that faces the sun, either in morning or afternoon, close it in the morning if it's in east, if it's in the east and or the west in the afternoon, particularly if you have those kinds of things. Just keep the shades drawn, or keep it just so the radiant temperature doesn't get in. Anyway, thermostat settings, John. Make sure it's on cool, right? I mean, I know that sounds simple.
Make sure it's on cool. Make sure that your thermostat has, if it's battery powered, that it has batteries, that the batteries are good. Okay.
Correct.
That's going to be the classic thing. If you're talking about simple fixes, is that a lot of times that people, their thermostats don't work, and they think it's the AC unit.
It's not. It's the batteries in the unit, right?
Yeah. And there's people out there that they'll take advantage of that situation and charge a lot of money to come in, diagnose, and change your batteries.
Yeah.
So don't let that happen to you.
Yeah, they'll do a service charge, and that usual service charge, at least here in Atlanta, is $150 for them to show up.
Or it could be very unscrupulous.
Yeah.
So be careful of those kind of things.
So 2 things there: check the batteries. Right. Number 1, make sure they're functioning, make sure they're good. And number 2, make sure your thermostat is set on cool or on auto, but generally on cool.
Yep.
If you put it on cool, you have no doubt that it should be in the cooling mode. So you want it on cool. And I know that seems simple, and it is, but been there, done that, right?
Yeah, been there,
Especially in
been
the
there. Well, a
transition
lot of
zone.
folks just don't, they don't understand some of this stuff,
Right.
um, and that's
No
why,
harm, no foul.
especially for folks that if you're on your first home or anything like that, you really should understand it, especially as a pretty comprehensive system like your HVAC units, so
Yep.
to understand all this.
Yep. What's the second one, Johnny?
Well, it's the classic change your air filter.
It's the classic change your air filter. Make
And
that
it's all
airflow
see when
easily.
you dig back in into some of this information on AC, how it works. It's all about pressures and temperatures,
And airflow.
and and the airflow affects some of the temperatures and pressures,
Yep.
and then you
Yep.
get yourself in a bad way.
Yep.
And
Yep.
don't block your return vents with couches and stuff. So
I was that's one of the other tips is check your vents and registers. Make sure they're all open. Oh, well, make sure they're open where you want the air to be cool. So if you have a room that you just don't use, that's fine. But you do have to be cognizant of some of that pressure that John's talking about because the pressure can affect
yeah,
it. Now,
yeah.
that's not. I'm not sending out this great warning that you need to worry about that, but you do have to make sure that your vents and registers are open. And John, you know this. We've talked about this before, but houses have vibrational frequencies, and sometimes those vents close without your input.
No, I experienced one already. Some of mine are stuck, and then some of
Yep.
them are just really loose.
Really, it's
And
funny you say
yeah,
that because it's really true.
and
Right?
I noticed one in the front was totally closed, and I'm like, I didn't do that.
No,
So
sometimes literally the house just vibrates and
yeah,
closes. And I know that just trust us on this
yeah,
one. You just have to understand, but check your vents and registers, right? Air filters and vents and registers. You want lots and lots of good airflow over the units. This is another one. Is the unit actually on? Is there power to the unit? How would you check that, John?
well, go to the unit. you
Well,
know,
the simple way is turn your thermostat
yeah,
on and hit. Should be a function for the blower, and if you
you
flip the
should
blower
the
on,
blower
it
should be
should
coming on.
fan. It should run. The
Yeah.
unit itself should run, and that's probably the simplest way. And I think we don't need to go too much further than that because the rest of it's into.
No, and I'll just say this: a lot of times, if there are like light switches. Sometimes they
Mhm.
put in a light switch to cut the power
Yep.
off,
Yep.
and things like that. If you're having work done, let's say in my case, I've got an air handler in the attic, and I have
Mhm.
a switch up there for that.
Mhm.
If you're like me and you've had maybe somebody up there that's working, they could accidentally hit that switch,
It happens all the time.
and it could cut the power to the whole unit. So you just have to be. Then once again, folks, if you kind of study HVAC a little bit, it'll take you about a half hour, and then understand your situation. You can diagnose a lot of this stuff pretty quick.
Exactly. Check your circuit breaker as well,
Yep.
because the circuit breaker could have tripped, particularly if you've had a thunderstorm roll through in the not too distant past. Like all of a sudden your AC doesn't work. Check your breakers. You want to check, are the units, does the unit have any kind of a plug-in? And a lot of them do. A lot of these things have just a regular plug-in. Go check the plug, make sure it's actually plugged in, because sometimes, as we've talked about for the same reason about the vents, they work their way out, or somebody scuffs it with their
Yeah.
hip or something and pulls it out. These are just, like I said, these are simple tips that can save you, several $100s in some cases, to just check. It's just part of this troubleshooting process. Just make sure there's power on there. Is there actually power to the unit? And it doesn't mean you get a tester. You can get a tester out if you have a non-contact tester, which we talk about all the time. Wave it over it. If it lights up and says there's power there, you're good to go. But you don't assume that because it's there, it's necessarily on, because it's not necessarily on. So, all right, now we go to the outside unit, John. So the outside unit is the big square thing that sits on the side of your
Yeah,
house,
the
right?
condenser.
The condenser, as it's called. What are we checking on the condenser?
Man, it's keep that thing keep that thing clean and look for debris around it. And so, what it's doing is it's sucking air in through those vents and it's blowing out the hot air, the heat that it's pulling out of your house.
Right. This is all
So,
about heat exchange, as
so
it's
what we're
called.
doing
Yeah.
here is that when that thing comes, when the air is coming in and coming out, it's creating a way for stuff to get trapped in there, right?
Yes.
So if you put your hand next to you, you can feel that it's sucking in and
It
blowing
should
out.
be. It
So
should be.
so one of the units at my old house is, when the trees started to, like, I don't know what the hell they were, like a cottonwood or something, and all those white little fuzzy things would be flying around.
Yes.
It would
Bad voodoo.
totally clog up the unit.
Yes.
The whole thing was white like snow.
Yes. This is
So
not good.
you're going to be in a bad way when that happens. And that's in the summer. And
Correct.
I'll tell you, so just keep an eye on that stuff. When the unit stops, there's no more, suction is not blowing. And then, either hose that off or whatever, but get all that stuff off of there. But
Correct. There's a whole there is that fan on top of the unit, and that fan needs to be able to run. Okay.
yep,
So you want to look for anything that might be obstructing that fan. I had a branch come down, and just a small stick went into the top of
yeah, there you
the
go.
top of the unit, and it stopped the fan from running. And fortunately, I caught it before it burned up the fan motor, because you can burn that fan motor up. And those fan motors they're not expensive, but they're
Yeah.
not cheap.
But for most of us,
clean
you're going to
it,
have
right?
to have a guy come out and fix it. And
Yeah,
that's
I
the
would
thing.
agree with that. But you can stop the debris from being in there. So
Yep.
make sure that it's clear all the way around. Leaves, and John's talking about those, whatever those things are, those little white fuzzy things.
Yeah.
There's plenty of really good videos on how to clean your condenser
Yeah.
unit out there. So we're just going to refer to go on YouTube and search cleaning your condenser unit. And there's some nuances there. Be very careful with, do never pressure wash one.
Yeah.
Never. They have aluminum fins in there. It's a radiator is what it is. And it has aluminum fins, and you'll bend those fins up if you put too much pressure on them. So there's some nuance to it. And we're not going to get into doing that. Maybe we'll shoot a video about it sometime, but there's so many good videos out there. I don't see the reason to do another one. But every so often you might want to clean that unit out too. And remember, sometimes there's two sets of coils, so you clean both inside and outside. And there's some tips to that. And make sure the power is off and all that good groovy stuff. We're not really going to get into that. Go look for a good video. There's plenty of them out there. But you want to make sure it's clear of debris, and it's as simple as leaves and grass clippings and pine. Here in the South, we use pine straw, mulch, mud. If the thing floods, it'll get mud caked up in there. That's a no bueno. It's not good. You want complete airflow through that thing. So take a look at that. And then the fan needs to be spinning. That upper fan needs to be spinning. So am I missing anything there, John?
No. I mean, as you guys get a little bit more DIY on this, if you're not already, there's a few parts on that thing. We won't go into it, that you can, fix yourself. Not a big deal.
Yep.
But once again, I think the knowledge is key before you wind up spending a lot of money to hire somebody out.
Right.
These are things to check and keep on your keep on your radar to keep your unit running.
Yeah, and one other thing I just want to say: be careful of the scam people that are sitting there saying, hey, we can clean your unit for $500 and it'll increase your efficiency and stuff. Yeah, you can clean your own unit for probably, if you use chemicals, for probably $50, and an hour's worth of your time. So again, it's just kind of cautionary. These are things that you certainly can DIY. If you choose to hire somebody, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But just be aware, it's not an intricate repair job. Okay, it doesn't require super special tools. It requires a hose and maybe a brush, and use a very soft bristle brush if you do that as well. So, and a little bit of chemicals that you can buy. There's actually coil cleaning chemicals you can buy, or you can create your own.
Just be careful, folks.
Yeah, just read the instructions.
Just be careful.
Yeah, just be careful.
Because I'll tell you why, Larry, that I say that, and I'm kind of apprehensive on that, is because at the rate of these things changing, there's so many variations of HVAC units now, and what they're made out of.
Yep, I agree.
it's like I don't want to give any advice to, you
Well,
know.
so the bit of advice that I would give is just off the side of your unit, get the manufacturer's number and go to what the manufacturer says, what they
Exact.
suggest.
That's a great tip. That's all you got to
Really,
do. That's
that'll
all.
tell you everything you need to know.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
They'll tell you what to do. They
Yeah.
really do. They will tell you what to do.
But
So
that
follow
is,
your
but that
manufacturer's.
right there is really key to keep the outside unit clean. If anything's really going to get dirty, it's going to be that.
Yep.
Now, we talked about on an earlier show about the inside, the evaporator and draining properly.
Correct.
So,
Yep. So we're getting
yeah,
to
we're
that.
getting there.
So this is the outside unit. Here's one of the other advantages to doing some of this maintenance too. If you do these items, you clean that outside condenser on a relatively regular basis, once a year or so, you're actually increasing your efficiency. So you're going to save money by doing these types of activities. Now, how much money I can't say, but it does two things, right, John? What does it do? Saves you on your electric bill, but what else does it do?
Well, it's gonna increase the efficiency of the unit and
Which
and the lifespan. So
lifespan?
so
Yep,
you're doing yourself a favor by keeping an eye on all this.
absolutely. Yeah.
And I will tell you, let me go back to that I don't know if it was the cotton, I don't know what the cottonwood, or I don't know what those
Whatever it is, I know what you're talking about.
those things were blowing, like, I mean, it was like snowing out at a certain time of year. And I'll tell you, you need to keep your eye on that stuff because it will accumulate like overnight. I mean, there
Quickly.
was so much of that stuff coming down. I don't know where that tree was, but there was so much of that stuff coming down. It was unbelievable.
Yep.
So, you need to just be kind of vigilant on this.
Yeah. Just be aware of it.
Yeah.
And everybody's home is different, so every circumstance is different. But a lot of that, like those, that's actually just a visual check. You can see that stuff. I know exactly what John's
Yeah.
talking about because I've seen it. There's other things just like that get out there in the air. And here in the South, or here in Atlanta anyway, we have a huge pollen problem, and even pollen, right, John?
Oh, it'll clog. Yeah.
It'll clog and it will slow down the airflow through that unit, and it's easy to take off. You just take the hose and just hose it off, but it matters.
I mean,
It really
no matter
does
where you
matter.
live, folks, unless you live in the middle of maybe the desert, I don't know what's the
Sand, then you got
but,
sand.
But you got,
you know?
but it's one of these things. No matter where you live, what's blowing around. Everybody's got maybe a little bit different scenario, but
Different times of year,
whatever is blowing around, that thing's it's gonna stick to the outside of that when it's running.
Absolutely. Yep. If you live in snow country, you should probably cover the unit in
Yeah.
the wintertime to keep the snow and ice out of there.
Yep.
Because it can cause damage. It can cause damage to it. We don't really talk about that much, but John and I both lived in the north.
Yep.
We never had central air at our house. Any of the houses I lived at when I lived, outside of in Western New York, I never had central air, so we never really worried about it. But I do know now, everybody they generally cover their units.
we
They put
used
at
to.
least put a piece of plywood on the top to keep icicles and stuff from smashing through, and then because this stuff it's not, how do I want to say it, it's not like, it's sensitive, like you don't want to bang into it, which is why they put grates over it. You'll see that your unit has a grate over it, but it is somewhat sensitive, so you don't want it filled with a lot of gunk. Anyway, that's the condenser. That's the outside unit. So what do we got on the inside unit, John?
Yeah, so we talked about this before. Is that you want to make sure that it's going to it's going to have condensation coming out of it, and you got to get rid of the condensation.
Correct.
And that condensation is going to get really, really gunky too, by the way. We on a prior show we did talk about this a little bit, but going over this again is just make sure that you kind of keep your eye on that. That whole drain line is free.
Make sure your condensate pump is pumping water out. Right.
Yep.
We've given tips. You add a little vinegar to it. That'll keep a little vinegar. That changes the pH and doesn't allow anything to grow in there. It'll also help clean it out. If you have to blow it out with a little light compressed air, you can do that as well. But you want that water getting out of there, and it gets filled with I don't know what that stuff. It's a type of mold or
it's a mold that's coming off the coils itself. So
yeah,
and it's draining down in there, and it gets nasty. So if you have either it's gravity fed or it's gravity that's taking it away if your unit's high, or you have a little pump that's next to it, and you'll see it. There's going to be something coming out there now. You know,
That's
what is?
that's so this causes, just if you have gravity feed, just for example, most gravity feed systems have a shutoff switch that's moisture sensitive. So if it's not draining properly, there's a little box, it's usually attached to the side of the pan, that if there's water touching that, it shuts the unit off.
Yeah,
Off.
it
Dead.
should.
Like you,
Yeah,
it's off. And that's one of the biggest. HVAC companies love for you to call with that problem because that's 4.5 seconds for them and they made $150 and they love it. And you folks clean the tube out. It's really as
yeah.
simple as generally you can stick some kind of like a coat hanger or something down there. And the next thing you know, the water drains off and you're good to go. Then at that point, add a little something, vinegar, bleach,
Yeah.
whatever, something to clean that tube out. But
So so
it'll
here's
shut them off.
yeah. My story is. So let me ask you, Larry. So you've got a condensate pump, and they usually have like a little hose that you see on the side of a fish tank or something like that.
Yes.
And it's
Usually a
running
clear
it's running
plastic
out of
tube.
there, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
where's that hose going in your case?
I know exactly where it goes. It goes out over to the outside of the house, out on the, as I look at the front of the house to the right hand side. Anyway,
Is it laying on the ground?
it is not in my case because I've already know where you're going with this. Been there, done that one. So go ahead.
So mine was laying on the ground, and mine's
Yes,
mine's underneath, my portico, and you don't really see it often.
correct.
Well, over the years, it got covered
Mm-hmm.
and got blocked.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
So
it filled
and
up.
I went back out there and I pulled it up, and I probably pulled about 2 feet of it up off out of the mud. So, and all you're talking about is that little pump. There's really no pressure there.
There's no
So,
pressure there.
it's like it was stuck in the mud over the years.
Yes.
I'm lucky I
Clogged.
caught that. So, anyways,
Yeah.
there's
So
just
I have
keep
a
that.
similar story. I have a similar story. So this was on a gravity drain system. Actually, it's in one of my rentals, and uh, I had the tube down close to the ground, and it basically got clogged with a little bit of pine straw. And the next thing you know, the water, it actually clogged it full. A mud dauber got in there
Yep,
too. So it was a
that's
combination of bugs and/or it was just too
that's what
low.
happened to me.
Yep. And the water backed all the way up into the unit and actually drained. Well, it shut the unit off, but it also dripped into the house. And I was like, what the heck's going? And I go out there and sure enough, it's clogged. Just the gravity. So that was 3/4 inch PVC. So that's the gravity drain part is 3/4 PVC. I cleaned that thing out. So I cut it up off the ground a
Yep.
little ways, about a foot up off the ground to make sure that it would drain properly. Plus I wanted a visual. I wanted to be able to look at it visually and see the drip, 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 drips. And that fixed that problem. So that's so
Yeah,
similar situation.
I had the same thing, and folks you don't want to run into that situation. It's not good. So kind of like I said, you keep your eye on this stuff, and
Yeah.
make
And
yourself
here's
out a
the
little checklist to just walk around once a year, or or twice
It's
a year,
about all it
whatever.
takes. Yeah, it's about takes once a year.
And
Here's another thing too. If your AC unit is in the attic up above, right? These issues matter because if the thing does overflow, what does it do?
well, if what does it do? In my case, it's got an outlet to it that flows out onto my deck
Oh, onto your deck. But
from an
what
overflow pan. But if
what
it
happens if the overflow plan does not drain and it gets clogged? Just for
then
example.
it's just going to be pouring down onto your ceiling. Probably that whole thing's going to come through into your bedroom or something.
And now you have a very expensive
Yeah.
repair called your ceiling just collapsed over whatever room you
Right.
happen to have it in.
Right.
So, and it too, that's another thing. If you see a stain in your ceiling, you need to go take a look at it and understand why. Is it a roof leak or could it be your AC unit? And it can be either or both. But we've seen it before, and I'm sure we'll see it again. So as we say, we're trying to help save you time, money, and aggravation. You really don't want your ceiling collapsing because that is a major aggravator along with a lot of expense as well. But it's really nasty when a ceiling comes down. So a couple other things on this for your AC things too. One is make sure the blower motor inside the house is working. I know that seems simple, but it needs to come on and blow cold air through it, right? So that can be a couple of different things. One is back to it. That's one thing that sometimes is plugged in, just plugged into a regular plug. Make sure that's plugged in. If you can't see that, but make sure when you turn it on that it actually comes on. It's not blocked. Sometimes it can get clogged up with a lot of goo, or it can just be old. And if it's old, you're going to have to probably pay somebody to change it because sometimes it can be tough to replace because there's usually a lot of stuff in the way. And I would suggest that's not really a DIY project. It's a project
You
for,
talking
I mean,
about
if
a
you're,
blower motor that's separate from the unit, the air handler?
yep. Well,
Yeah.
or part of the air handler, it doesn't matter. It needs to come on, right? So if you've got a blower in the air handler is the part in your house. It's the inside part.
Yeah.
And then along with that is inside there are coils in there as well. It happens to be called the condenser unit. It's condenser?
The evaporator.
Right, inside evaporator, excuse me. It's the evaporator unit. And those coils need to be cleaned too. And I'm going to relate a personal story on that. We had it's a rental property, but the people had dogs, and swear to God, got in there one day and opened that thing up, and the evaporator was full. I mean, full of dog hair, like so much that it was blocking airflow.
Yeah.
And it was simple. We vacuumed it out, and then we just used a little bit of water and hosed it out to get it all out. But that needs to be clear as well. That might be a little more difficult to check. But again, what had happened in this particular unit, back to the HVAC filters, the people hadn't used the HVAC filter.
Yeah.
So the dog hair got sucked up into the unit, and then we had a bigger problem. So don't take your HVAC filters out and leave it empty. They're there for a reason.
All right, Larry.
Anything else, John?
No.
I think that's it. That's a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
but
that's a
believe
lot
it or
of
not,
stuff. I think from my takeaway here is that get yourself a list, understand your system, and I think you're probably going to be good to go.
we will post. This will be part of the description. I'm going to add this whole list as part of the description, so you'll have an idea. This is a good place to start.
Yeah.
And so you'll have this list. Understand a bit about your system, and it's not crazy stuff like this whole list. Johnny, how long would it take you to do this whole list?
Not long at all.
Probably 45 minutes.
Yeah,
tops.
45 minutes.
Tops.
Yeah.
Tops.
Yeah.
And that is that 45 minutes worth that $150. I'll
yeah.
let you be the description on that. But here's the other thing. There's more. It's more than just the $150. When can they get there? In the middle of heating and cooling, or not heat? I mean, in the middle of cooling season, at least here in Atlanta. Good luck if they'll be here today. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe.
Yeah. Maybe.
It's just maybe. And if you can circumvent some of these problems, you get your house back to cooling quickly, not having to wait on somebody else's schedule. So it's just some thoughts, right? Just some random thoughts. All right, Johnny.
All right, Larry.
Johnny. Do you think they use cooling? You know what? When they were out there in space the last time that they had me up there, we were down by the sun. It was kind of hot.
By the sun.
Yeah, well, they were.
They checked your drain pipe.
Thanks, Johnny.
All right, Larry. All right, folks. Listen, Larry's going to post all this in the description. You guys have your checklist. Learn the system. Stay cool, save some time and money, and we'll see you next week on the Handyman Pros Radio Show.